98.1 KZE, good afternoon and welcome back. This is Will with you here for another installment of the Midweek Meetup, a feature of the afternoon drive program where we take a deeper dive into matters facing our KZE community, our United States, and our world. If you would like to get in touch with me regarding the Midweek Meetup, comments, questions, concerns, you can always email me directly at wkzemeetup@gmail.com. And our guest this afternoon, Terri Wilder, activist for the ME community. And this Saturday, May 12th, is a global action, Millions Missing. You can learn more, millionsmissing.org. Terri Wilder, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Terri, thank you so much for taking the time to spend some time with us here at KZE. I want to go over just a few sort of almost housekeeping issues. I want to talk about what ME is and what are the struggles that go along with ME. I want to talk about the event this weekend. I want to start by acknowledging the fact that you are joining me from New York City, where you live, on the phone. For the Midweek Meetup, I don't usually book guests that I talk to over the phone. I like to be in the same room, making eye contact, exchanging ideas. With ME, you have ME.
Yes.
It would be next to impossible, as I understand it, for you to conveniently schedule a trip here to the Mid-Hudson Valley.
Yes. I was diagnosed, and so, just so your audience knows, ME stands for Myalgic Encephalomyelitis. And I was diagnosed with it in 2016 after probably having it since the 90s. It's a systemic neuroimmune disease that its hallmark symptom is post-exertion malaise, which is kind of code for a severe worsening of symptoms after minimal exertion, and that can be either kind of mental exertion, cognitive exertion, or physical exertion. So for many of us with this disease, what happens is that something like travel from New York City on a train to see you kind of in an upper state region would absolutely kind of crash our body, is what we call it, a crash. And it's something that unless you see it, you may not believe that it happens, but we literally feel like we have no gas in our gas tank. We literally cannot do some of the basic things that people probably don't even think about on a daily basis, like brushing their teeth, taking a shower, maybe making some scrambled eggs, can absolutely wipe out our body. We have a very, very kind of short and small energy envelope in which we have enough energy to do things in a day. So yeah, it would probably wipe me out just to try to come and see you for your radio program. So for me, this is really great that I can talk to you via phone because it kind of preserves my health, if you will.
I first started to learn a little bit more about ME here on the Midweek Meetup from Vassar College professor and an ally of the ME community, David Esteban. We talked about ME a few months back when he visited us here at KZE. Listeners will know this affliction, I think, through a common name that recently you folks are trying to move away from, the term chronic fatigue syndrome.
Correct. So chronic fatigue syndrome, for maybe your audience members who, were adults, teenagers in the 80s, they may have heard newscasters talk about this disease. They may have also heard it be referred to as the yuppie flu. Obviously, kind of chronic fatigue syndrome, yuppie flu, has some stigmatizing undercurrents to it and really does not capture what is going on with a person's body. I mean, this disease really causes dysregulation of both the immune system and the nervous system. And the effects of this disease are so devastating that it can leave up to about 25% of people who have it housebound or bedbound. And there's an estimate that about 75% of people are unable to work. So when you think about this in terms of like our country, the United States, and that they estimate that it affects between 1 to 2.5 million people, and yet this disease kind of really remains invisible or not taken seriously, it really creates a situation where literally millions of people are potentially missing from their own lives.
Our guest this afternoon for the Midweek Meetup on 98.1 KZE, Terri Wilder, an activist in the ME community. You can learn more if you visit meaction.net, and there is an action this Saturday, May 12th, Millions Missing. Learn more, millionsmissing.org. I want to talk about Millions Missing this weekend in just a moment, Terri Wilder. First, let's hear a little more of your story, because I would imagine that there are some common themes among people who have been dealing with ME. Do you remember the moment where you started to think that something was amiss in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I originally thought that something was kind of off in around 1996. I mean, I should tell you that I've always been a runner. I'm from Georgia. I used to run the Peachtree Road Race each year with my father in Atlanta, Georgia. Always played tennis, taken yoga, gone to the gym, did aerobics. Of course, I'm dating myself saying I did aerobics. But, I was athletic and, traveled a lot. And in 1996, something just hit me like Mack truck. And I literally remember I was living in Minneapolis, Minnesota, moved back to Georgia, and literally had to live with my mother for about 18 months and could not get out of the bed. Spent about 22 hours a day of my life in bed.
How did your family respond? Your mother specifically, you were living with her.
I mean, she knew something was wrong. I mean, my boyfriend and I had just broken up. I think they might have thought, oh, she's depressed.
Yeah.
But there was something wrong, and I, getting back into the Georgia area, just kind of looked up a doctor off of a list, went to the clinic and just said, when they say, so what brings you in today? I literally said, I think I'm dying. And I said, I need you to test me for everything. Look at everything. I said, there's something wrong. Our family has a history of cancer and heart disease. Like maybe something's happening. And everything came back normal, which is also typical for people with ME. The typical blood labs that are ordered by medical providers aren't really looking for the right things. And so, she basically kind of sent me home with, I don't really know what's going on. And it's interesting that my grandmother was like, well, maybe we should try Eastern medicine. Let's go to a chiropractor. Let's, look, see if somebody else can look at it a different way.
Acupuncture, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, the chiropractor did some testing and said you were eaten alive with yeast. There was something going on with your immune system. I think you have fibromyalgia, which is pain in your muscles. And so he put me on an elimination diet and some supplements, and I did start having some relief. And felt okay for several years, and then around 2014, just started feeling terrible again. And it actually was one of my coworkers who came up to me and said, there is something wrong with you. You just don't act the same. Your brain doesn't work the same. You should really go get this checked out. And interestingly, it was through one of my friends who's a very famous AIDS activist, Peter Staley, who I actually got in touch with Jen Brea, who is the director of the documentary Unrest, which is about ME. And she gave me the name of a couple of medical providers in New York City, and I got into an appointment with one of them, and they literally diagnosed me within 20 minutes and said, you are so sick, I can't believe you're even working. So, to get the correct diagnosis, look at where my story began, 1996. And I was just diagnosed in 2016. So that's, one of the concerns about this disease is that medical providers don't know what to look for. Sometimes because of this kind of stigmatizing chronic fatigue syndrome, they don't believe it's real. And so that's why May 12th is so important. It's an international awareness day. And in New York State, we actually have two events. One is in New York City, which people can find out information about it at millionsmissing.org. And then there's also an event in Rochester on May 12th. They're going to actually have a screening of Unrest. And the great thing about May 12th is that we're literally in New York State joining over 90 cities worldwide to call on the government and health officials to take action for people living with this disease. So it's really a global day of protest to demand health equality for people with ME. And specifically, we're demanding that the director of the National Institute of Health, Dr. Francis Collins, dramatically step up his investment and commitment to ME and increase research funding in order to support the development of a biomarker, clinical trials, and ultimately the first FDA-approved treatment. You know, our government continues to ignore the lives and deaths and suffering of people with this, and it's just unconscionable that this is happening. I mean, I've also been involved in the HIV community, and, you know, this story sounds very similar. This is what we did to people with HIV in the early years of the epidemic. We ignored them. You know, funding wasn't invested to identify what was happening with people's bodies and clinical trials and getting the first FDA-approved treatments. And it's just, you know, why are we doing this again? One of the things I think that we should keep in mind here is that I cannot ignore the fact that of the people who are diagnosed, about 85% of them are women. So is sexism and gender inequality driving this disease? That is why we're not seeing a coordinated response? I mean, I can't ignore that fact.
Our guest this afternoon for the Midweek Meetup on 98.1 KZE, Terri Wilder, an activist in the ME community. To learn more, you can check out meaction.net. And for the event this Saturday, it's millionsmissing.org. You mentioned the film Unrest, Terri. I believe it is on Netflix right now.
Yes, Netflix, Amazon Prime. There's lots of places people can watch it, and I would encourage people to watch it. It is an amazing film directed by Jen Brea, who's a woman living with ME. She actually directed the majority of it from her bed because she, you know, has this disease. And it was her very first film, and she actually has won a number of awards, including winning at Sundance. It is an amazing story of her life with this disease, but she also has people from literally around the world kind of highlighted in this disease. It is very moving. It is appropriate for medical providers to watch it, scientists, public health folks, and people who care about chronic disease. It's really a great representation of where we're still not there in terms of healthcare being a human right. And I would encourage everyone to watch it. It is so worth your time. I would also suggest you make sure you have a box of Kleenex by you.
Terri Wilder, we are just about out of time. I want to use the bit of time that we do have left to talk about what it is like to have this struggle with your health that is so misunderstood, and the stigmatizing language of something like chronic fatigue syndrome. I think that many of our listeners here in the Mid-Hudson Valley will relate to with something like Lyme disease, an affliction that is controversial, that is not understood, that there is intense disagreements about, as I understand it, still in the scientific and medical community. I don't want to make light, certainly, of any medical condition, but if you go to the doctor and you have the flu, there is a plan for you in place. There are steps that you know that you can take. And I can't even imagine what it's like to deal with something like ME, where there doesn't seem to be a very good roadmap.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the great things is that the Institute of Medicine in 2015 put out a report, and people can Google it. You can just type in like ME IOM 2015 report, and it really outlines, particularly from clinicians and medical providers, like how to diagnose this. You know, if you look for it, you will find it. You know, when people come to doctors and medical providers' offices and they are describing extreme fatigue, that it like almost they can't get out of the bed, cognitive issues like sound sensitivity, light sensitivity, chemical sensitivity. Start thinking about putting this on your differential diagnosis. The stigma is real. I can give you just a very quick story that I went to a cardiologist because people with ME tend to be more at risk for cardio problems and cancer. My family just kind of naturally has a history of cardio problems. So I just went to kind of just get a baseline checkout, And when I was giving this cardiologist my history, I shared that I had this diagnosis of ME, and this doctor literally looked at my face and said, you know, people don't believe your disease exists. And what she was saying was she didn't believe my disease exists. And because I am an activist and I recognize that I am a consumer of healthcare and that I am writing a check, I promptly got up and told her that we were finished for the day, that I was not staying there to be told that what I had just shared was not real, and that I would happily find another cardiologist to work with me. And I did, and then I called the next day and complained. So, you know, these stories, while shocking, are very common for people with ME, being, you know, ignored, not believed, etc. And I think that's why the language that we use is so important, to really move away from saying chronic fatigue syndrome, yuppie flu, because it just makes it sound like you went out and stayed too late at the bar and, you know, didn't get enough sleep. It is debilitating, and it actually has ruined people's lives. I mean, I've met through kind of this platform of ME Action people literally all over the world, and people's lives have been destroyed because of this disease. There's, you know, a dancer that I know that was very talented. He cannot dance anymore. There was a journalist that was very talented who cannot write anymore. It literally destroys people's lives, which is why Millions Missing is so important this Saturday, to raise awareness and so that people understand that this disease is real, and it requires a concerted effort to get funding and services in place so that people don't have to suffer as much as they have.
Well, Terri Wilder, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us here on the Midweek Meetup on 98.1 KZE. Terri Wilder, an activist in the ME community. You can learn more about her work when you visit meaction.net, and the event this Saturday, May 12th, it's millionsmissing.org. Terri Wilder, safe travels to you. Best of luck with all of the work that you do, and hopefully we get to see you again down the road.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Terri. It's 98.1 KZE.